All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about the roots of ancient Judaism. Why do I choose these really complex topics? so, um, so we're going to be covering quite a bit. It is not an easy tale to tell, and there's a reason for that. It is literally a labyrinth of information that goes on many different levels. And so I think the best way to start is just actually starting with the word Judaism. And it's like, so what does the word Judaism mean? Well, there has been many different thoughts and perspectives on this. You would think that that would be an easy answer, but it's not. But some have said that it's connected to Judah. Um, so the word Judah. Some others have said that it is connected to the word Yehuda, which sounds like Jehoiakim. And of course, we get the word derivation Jew from this. Of course, still, we're back to where does this come from? Some people will say it derives from one of the tribes, one of the 12 tribes, and that being Judah or people of Judah. But maybe others have said, no, it goes back earlier and could be connected to the word Yahweh. And so the idea is that it is connected to the word God. So just followers of God. So we have, the interesting thing is it just depends on what sort you look into. But there you have it. I think followers of God probably works the best. However, now let's go a little bit further. Now, according to the Hebrew Bible, God intervenes directly in history, progressively providing his revelation and insights at various stages, at certain pivotal moments in time. What sets Judaism apart from some of the other religions, like Hinduism and Buddhism, is that while history is important to a little degree, like Buddhism, the teachings of Buddha, Judaism is claiming to be a historical religion. The historical, of course, Abrahamic religions that gives birth then in turn to Christianity and to Judaism. I just want to do a quick overview. Don't worry, we're going to actually go deep into the roots of Judaism from an archaeological standpoint. And I know you're wanting that, but I need to do something to just kind of bring you in so you kind of see an overview of Judaism. So, according to Jewish thought, in more of a modern perspective to a certain degree, I shouldn't say modern. When I say modern, I'm probably talking about the Roman period. It's modern for me. Um, anyway, accordingly, these supernatural intervention in history occur when it is believed that God feels that humanity is mature enough in their development for the next step. This idea is brought about by Rabbi Akiva into the first century. Basically, the idea is that we mature, and as we mature, God, in a sense, changes along with that maturity. So, for example, God is believed to create Adam and Eve and places them in the Garden of Eden, a beautiful paradise where all is in balance with God and nature, right? Right. And then Yahweh is presented as communing directly and openly with humans, right? Right from the beginning, God is depicted as behaving one way towards Adam and Eve without any restrictions while they were still in the Garden of Eden, right? And quite another way following the fall after they consume the forbidden fruit, right, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where they could no longer be in his direct presence. The story goes that God decreed that they could eat from any tree of the Garden of Eden, but that the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was strictly forbidden. Suddenly, a serpent appeared and tempted Eve. After partaking of the fruit, she in turn gave it to Adam, who ate it with the full understanding of violating God's edict. Of course, you got to think to yourself that it's Adam who took it with full understanding. Eve did not. So, hey, where's the guilt? After the fall, Adam and Eve were forced to leave the Garden of Eden, with the period following the exile up to the great flood having yet another set of expectations believed to be established by God. But the world fell into wickedness accordingly, so God inundated the earth with water, preserving one righteous man, that would be Noah, right, and his family. And so began the Noetic age, yet another age which is characterized by the spread of the human race over the entire planet, or at least the known world at that time, right? And then the spread of different languages resulting from the hubris by humanity at the Tower of Babel. Next, God focuses attention upon certain groups of people, right? Amongst all the nations of the earth, making a special covenant with Abraham, being simply, he was simply a righteous man to earn God's favor, right? Abraham is told the ritual act of circumcision was to be a tangible sign of his special selection upon all the descendants. And then God also tells him that he is to lead his family to the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And so he leaves Ur and Mesopotamia and ends up in the Levant after his sons, Isaac and Jacob. One of Jacob's sons, by the name of Joseph, is sold off to his brothers to slavery because of their jealousy and ends up in Egypt, right? And eventually rises to the second unto Pharaoh, where he then provides his own family and their descendants shelter in this land because of the terrible famine in the region. Eventually, Pharaoh rises up who does not respect the Jews, and they are forced into slavery, according to the story. Following 400 years now of slavery in Egypt, the Egyptian, of course, captivity, and their subsequent exodus led by Moses towards the promised land of Israel. This relationship with the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews, or whatever name you want to call them, is again shown as changed by God, changed again, a new dispensation, right? At the moment Moses ascends Mount Sinai with the arrival of the law, best marked out by, of course, the Ten Commandments. You see how the idea of change is going on. Meanwhile, the presence of God moves from only special revelations to continuous presence in a portable tabernacle. Remember this from the Indiana Jones, the Temple of Doom? That would be the Ark of the Covenant. Then, after their arrival in Israel, after the time when judges were in charge of the nation, Israel wishes to have a king, and so one is selected with the capital located, of course, in Jerusalem. During the reign of the third king, Solomon, the temple is built, ushering in now what's called the first temple period. Now you got a temple, right? So the presence of God is now transferred from the tabernacle to a special sacred room at the back of the temple known as the Holy of Holies. After Solomon's reign, right, the kingdom is split in two, with the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judea in the south. This is a 922. During the entire period of the judges, the United Kingdom and the two kingdoms, the Jewish people experienced an identity crisis, with many of the Israelites at one moment following and at other times rejecting the edicts believed to come from God as revealed by Moses to his people. So as a result of their faithfulness or their unfaithfulness was demonstrated via God's interventions historically, with him giving victory to the Israelites in the tangible world when they were faithful, and allowing them to lose and suffer various repercussions when deemed unfaithful. the rewards and punishments going on here, right? The fall of the northern kingdom of Israel to the Assyrians in 722 BCE was ushered as actually was used as an example of this of unfaithfulness to Yahweh, right? And of course, the big final lesson of wrongdoing is the Babylonian captivity when the kingdom of Judah falls to the Neo-Babylonians, with Jerusalem now captured, the temple destroyed, bringing the end to the first temple period. And many of the Israelites are brought as captives to live in Babylon. Hence, that's why it's called the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian captivity is the ultimate penalty box in a sense, interpreted by the Jews as God attempting to show them what could possibly happen if they are disobedient. This is a time where so many of their earlier doctrines leading to their devotion to God in both outward and inward traditions were reinforced and solidified. Yet another shift was the belief that the Jews did not necessarily need to have a country to still be Jewish, but that wherever they went, so too traveled the prescribed promises. With the Persian defeat of the Neo-Babylonians, the Jews were once again free to return to Jerusalem. Then now a second temple is built on the exact same location as the first one, ushering in what's called yes, that's right, the Second Temple period, which goes from 516 BCE to 70 CE. The Persians were followed by Alexander the Great, and under his successive Hellenistic kingdoms. But by the way, during this period of time, the Babylonian captivity, much of the identity of the Jews were really, of the Israelites, were really settled. They finally settled, with the majority on the idea of monotheism. They finally settled completely on the idea that they are a chosen people. They finally settled on the idea that that there is the text of the Hebrew Bible. That is, that's going to be central to them. They finally agreed to a lot of the holidays. They finally agreed to all the dietary restrictions. And of course, they finally agreed to circumcision. I know you think that they would have agreed a long time ago, but the reality is, the history of Judaism is that no, they didn't. As you find from, for example, First, Second Samuel, First, Second Kings, First, Second Chronicles. It's all there. It's like, yeah, there's other Judaisms. In fact, there's multiple Judaisms in many ways until you get to Babylonian captivity. There's lots of variants afterwards, but they're not as extreme as they were earlier. Well, anyway. So then, of course, you have the Hellenistic era, and of course the Septuagint. Now the Hebrew Bible is now in Greek, and then of course the Romans come along, and Jerusalem is destroyed in 70 CE, and now of course, so you see where we're going with this one. Oh, I forgot to mention during the Hellenistic era, you're going to have the Maccabean revolt, right? And so Israel, or I should say, Judah, gets their own nation again for a short period of time from the late Hellenistic period to the Roman era, and of course you have Herod and so forth. Anyway, 70 CE, the destruction, and then of course it's like the ultimate moment. Like, oh my goodness! Well, they call it various names. I see this. We call it Judea. They call it Judah. The Romans call it Palestine, and there's lots of names for this area during this period of time. So we see this on the inscriptions. So moving along, finally, it's like the ultimate penalty box. We lost Jerusalem, and so gradually, what's going to happen is that you're going to have the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism that comes from the ashes. And so that's kind of the overview. That's really, I got to tell you, that's really complicated. It's not an easy thing to teach. I don't, and I feel I have a lot of empathy for people who have to teach about the roots of Judaism. I guess just have empathy for myself because I always end up having to do it. And that is not easy. So here we go. Okay, I kind of did the overview, kind of the bird's eye view of things. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's get into how things were formed. How was it all about? And we're going to start, I guess we're going to have to start with the area of the Levant. And of course, Geographically, in the area of the Levant includes Israel and Palestine today, and Syria and Jordan and Iraq. It's Levant is just this big overarching area. And the people who were there earlier on were the Natufians, and they were there between 13,000 to 9,000, 8,000 BCE. And they're mostly an egalitarian kind of people. They cultivated the first figs, and they lived in semicircular one-room structures. They practiced a skull cult, which is kind of interesting, and that's where they had the person who just recently died, the skull, placed in the center of the house. And so when you come home and you basically see your relative sitting there looking at you, the skull was kind of painted over with seashells stuck in the face, and red ochre paint is on the platform there. And then, of course, the bones of those who previously died are buried under the house. They're all headless because the heads are kind of circulating around the perimeter. They were very interesting people. They tried or attempted to domesticate the gazelle, but yeah, fascinating. We go through and we see there's a pre-pottery Neolithic age, 8,500 to 7,600 BCE. And the skull cult first continued in places like Jericho and so forth. After the Natufians, you got the Harappan culture. Don't worry too much about this. It's interesting, the Harappan culture, as well as the Yarmouktian culture. Yes, they're egalitarian, but in many ways, they're almost, there's a lot of veneration of female figurines. The female figurines are basically everywhere to be found. So, for example, at Shar Holigan, they found 130 of these Yarmouktian figurines. 50 more were found at Munhada. I mean, they're everywhere to be found. But moving on, let's get into Canaan. So, what's most interesting to us in the context of understanding Judaism is, of course, understanding Canaan. And so we start off with the early Bronze Age Canaan. That's 3,300 BCE to 2,100 BCE. This is in the Levant area. This early Bronze Age, there were some major centers like Hatzor, and as well as Megiddo and Gezer and Dan. I got to tell you something. I would like to do, and I'll tell you this up front, I would love to do a talk on Tel Dan. That's because when I was trained as an archaeologist with my Tammy Snyder, my first investigation and work was connected with Tel Dan. And so I have like too much in the way of notes on this particular place. So maybe I should bring it to some kind of good use, right? Anyway, so Tel Dan. So we take a look at this place. By the way, Tel Dan, something we got to realize is that already in the early Bronze Age, I know we think of Canaan as being like, open land, pastures, and sheep everywhere, and we forget that there was a significant urban aspect to ancient Canaan early on. So like at Tel Dan, I mean, you had around 2,500 people. That's still a lot of people, for 2,700 BCE, right? So, that's the start, and then of course, eventually, you're going to have an increase after that point to further on later on to as high as 10,000 people. Tel Dan was known as Laish, meaning lion at the time. So we found lots of figurines of animals and pottery and pithoi and so forth. Very interesting. Now, at this point, the Egyptians, you're bringing the Egyptians in. Yeah, the Egyptians actually start to move in a little bit into the southern part of Israel, getting involved in trade in that area. And so you also have, of course, horticulture is very important in the highlands of Palestine as well. So then we move on to the Middle Bronze Age. I don't want to take too long, but Middle Bronze Age Here we go. The Middle Bronze Age Canaan, 2100 to 1550 BCE. During this period of time, we got a lot of information. We have a lot of records. And this is, according to Jewish tradition, is when Abraham enters into Canaan. There's many dates that are disputed, but they give the date roughly around 1800 BCE. So, 1800, he comes in, this is the beginning there. So let's understand the context of what's going on in Canaan during this Middle Bronze Age. Well, it turns out that even a little bit earlier, and then going into this age, we have the Ebla tablets. The Ebla tablets. In fact, some of them go as early as 2500 BCE. And we take a look at these tablets. Yeah, there's an archive, and there's a reference to the Lord of Canaan, which of course could be understood as Lord of Canaan. So already towards the end of the early Bronze Age, but used a lot more during the Middle Bronze Age. The name of this land, and let's say this, make sure everybody knows, is Canaan. It is understood by the people and by those of the surrounding areas as Canaan. There is no reference to Israel at this time. It is Canaan of the Canaanites. Okay? And they all have Canaanite names, which are, of course, Semitic names that are connected in many ways to Hebrew words. Next reference to Canaan arises by way of the Mari letters. The Mari letters dating to around 2000 BCE. Mari was an outpost for the Assyrians in Syria. And you have a reference by the king, his name is Shamsi Adad. It says, it is Ramsum that the brigands and the Canaanites are situated. So there's another reference to the Canaanites here. During the Middle Bronze Age again, Tel Dan is thriving and doing very well. But what is interesting that I see at Tel Dan and other places is that you're going to suddenly see these big ramparts, big earthenware fortresses. So you got this, basically, these ramparts, they have a stone core and rough stones around it that support the steep incline of earth. And at one point, at Tel Dan, the foot of the outer embankment is about 27 meters from the core. I mean, these are thick. We see them, yes, at Tel Dan, but we see them in the south, like around Jericho and other places. And these are connected, a lot of them are connected to those known as the Hyksos. Now, this is where it gets confusing, but the Hyksos are connected to the Canaanites. And many scholars will say the Hyksos are Canaanites. Others will say, well, the Hyksos are not Canaanites, but they share much of the same culture. Okay, we can go back and forth. But the Hyksos are now, during the Middle Bronze Age, in the area of Canaan. Got it? Okay. Oh, also at Tel Dan, it's pretty cool. I was able to see it at the time. There was a triple arched gate, an arch gate, a true arch. Dating from around 1750 BCE. I saw it, and then after I left, it collapsed. Maybe it was me, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to collapse the gate. Maybe I just jumped on top of it or something. No, never do that. But anyway, but at least I got to see it. Because it's rare. Because usually they think the Etruscans and then the Romans invented the arch. And I saw it. It was a full arch, dating that early. And there are pictures. You can take a look at it online if you're interested. Also, what I find is interesting at Tel Dan and other places, I'm sorry, I got to give my own personal experience here, is there's lots of jar burials of infants. So they're burying infants literally under the houses. Almost under every house, there is a infant that's buried there. Other cities are doing well, Hatzor and Gezer and Ugarat, and things are going well. Okay, so it is during this period, right? During the Middle Bronze Age, is where we have the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So during the Middle Bronze Age, you have the story here. This is the context. Okay, so we'll tell that story in a little bit. I just want to make sure that you know when I talk about the Middle Bronze Age, that you go to your mind. Oh yeah, this is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. This is yes. So now I'm going to go on to the late Bronze Age, and then we're going to go back to Abraham. So don't worry, be in the context. Actually, you're going to talk about the late Bronze Age, and then we're going to talk about the Canaanite religion, and then you're going to see how these beliefs kind of all come together. So, you guys ready? So once again, after me, Middle Bronze Age era ascribed, to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and then it ends with Joseph. Okay, so that's where the break comes. Let's go to the late Bronze Age. For your reference here, the late Bronze Age is 1550 to 1200 BCE. 1550 to 1200 BCE. This entire time is the captivity, the Egyptian captivity. Okay, so this period of time. So this what happens here, and I'll mention this briefly, then we'll go back to it later on, is that according to the story, Joseph goes to Egypt, and then he brings everybody to Egypt. He becomes second unto Pharaoh, has a lot of authority and so forth. But what is important to know is that during this period of time, remember those Hyksos I just told you about? You know, the ones who built these great ramparts, especially in the southern part of Canaan. Well, the Hyksos, they go crazy and they attack Egypt, and the middle kingdom of Egypt falls to the Hyksos. And as a result of that, the Hyksos take over Egypt during what is called the Second Intermediate Period. And the Hyksos become the Egyptian kings during this time. Why is that important? Because it seems to be a very interesting coincidence that the Hyksos and the Habiru, the Hebrews, are still related. They're still connected in many ways to Semitic peoples. And so when the Hyksos come in, many scholars have said this is the same time when the Habiru, the Hebrews, enter into Egypt at the same time. Then there will arise a man who knows not Joseph, and this is, of course, this is the native Egyptian dynasty, and they overthrow the Hyksos. They overthrow and bring about the new kingdom as Othnos the First, if you're curious what his name is. Bring forth the new kingdom, and so what happens is the Hyksos are defeated, and in many cases they're put in bondage. And according to Jewish belief, at the same time, their allies, the Habiru, are also put into slavery. We'll talk about the Habiru in Egypt through archaeology in a little bit. We're not there yet, but it's interesting. So you have the two at the same time, the two for one kind of deal. Meanwhile, if this is not confusing enough as it is, the Egyptians are not just taking over the Hyksos, defeating them in Egypt. They follow after the Hyksos and they invade Canaan and they take over Canaan. So during the entire late Bronze Age, or I should say the latter middle to the end, Canaan is under Egyptian rule. I will repeat, Canaan is under Egyptian rule. And so you take a look, you have, of course, most of this conquest was done by Thutmose III between 1479 to 1425. He actually made 17 campaigns into Palestine and the Near East, expanding the Egyptian empire all the way to the Euphrates River. And lots of the battles happened at Megiddo, of course, also known as the Valley of Armageddon, the Jezreel Valley, right? And so we take a look, and Thutmose, he wanted to clear the way to the sea, so to speak. And so we see that the Egyptians made their their provincial capital at a place known as Bet Shan. So I always throw people off when they say, "Hey, I want to go to Israel and I want to see Egyptian ruins and Egyptian artifacts." And they're going, "Can I go to Egypt?" No, they're there because the Egyptians were in Israel for a period of time. Oh, I'm just throwing you off, aren't I? All right. Then what happens? So here's the interesting part. So that means is that during the late Bronze Age, the Egyptians defeated of course the Hyksos, the Jews, the Hebrews are in slavery supposedly, right? And the Egyptians own Canaan. They take it over. Well, what's going to happen now is a disaster, which will lead to the end of the Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age. And that is, there's a group of mysterious people who I know exactly who they are, called Sea Peoples. They really caused problems in the 1200s. And you're going to have, of course, as a result of this, the Egyptians, happening during Ramses, and then, of course, goes further on. The Egyptians then are weakened. They lose everything when it comes to their overseas and overland empire in Asia because of the Sea Peoples, and they are weakened. And because of this weakness, the Habiru, the Israelites, are able to, according to the story, leave Egypt in this Exodus and go according to the belief. We'll go into all this, don't worry. According to belief, they go into the Promised Land. They go into they go into Canaan, and this, of course, starts the Iron Age. So we enter the Iron Age. Right, guys, got it? Woo! Oh, you don't feel sorry for me, do you? So it is complicated, right? So let's talk about. So now we have an understanding of where everything is. You paid attention. I'm sure you did because you're all great. You know exactly where I'm going. So, what are the beliefs of the Canaanites, and why is this important? Of course, they believe in things. Gods like Yam, who's the god of the sea, who does get mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. There's Mot, who's the god of the underworld and death, right? Who's known to have a great stinger. And so I always think about, death, where's thy sting? You have a few others as well, but one of the main ones, and this was very important to us, is that the Canaanites, now these are the Canaanites, they worship a god by the name of El. They worship a god, all high God, by the name of El, as an E-L. That's a god of the Canaanites. He first appeared on a list of gods discovered in the Royal Archive of Ebla. It dates to around 2300 BCE. He is listed as the Ancient of Gods, the Father of all gods, and he's already, according to these inscriptions and these writings, already considered one of the primary gods. Sometimes a bull is used to represent him. And so El, in a sense, becomes a generic word for God. It does. Okay. Now, in the Bible, when Abraham first arrives in Canaan, he does meet a certain Melchizedek, who is the priest king of Salem, which is Jerusalem. And this priest king worships the god El. And Abraham accepts blessings from this god named El, who was understood, according to the Hebrew Bible, understood completely as the same God he worshipped. Genesis 14, 18 through 20. Oh, wait, sorry. I'm sorry. You're thinking, wait, what? Wait. So, but we all know that El is the God of the Canaanites, the all-high God. Abraham goes to Melchizedek at Salem, which becomes Jerusalem, and they agree that El is the same God. They worship the same God. That's whoa. It's kind of a big deal, right? Think about it. Of course, this God was known as El Yom, which means God Most High, which becomes an epithet of God throughout the Hebrew Bible. I want to mention something that's interesting is that Salem, which is Jerusalem, where this god El was worshipped, was at a high place. That high place, ancient Canaanite high place, is the same place where the Dome of the Rock now stands. It's also the same place where the Jewish temple stood. It was the first temple and the second temple and the site of the Holy of Holies. It is a high point. It really is. I mean, it doesn't look like it, but it is. It was a higher mound. It's been chiseled down through time. So, but it's a high point. And so El was worshipped there long before Abraham was said to be there. It's an ancient site. Is this fascinating? Right? Okay. So here we go. So El, also known as El Shaddai. El Shaddai. Well, what does that mean? Okay, so of course, according to Exodus 6:2-3, El Shaddai is the name. It says, I revealed myself to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, but was not known to them by my name Yahweh. That's such a big deal because here is the Hebrew Bible saying that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't know at all God as Yahweh. Who says so? The Hebrew Bible says so. They only knew him as El, which is the Canaanite God. Wow. Okay. Let's go. What does Shaddai mean? Okay, so Shaddai, Shaddai can come from the root Shaddad, which means to overpower or to destroy. So it can mean God the overpowerer or God the destroyer. There's another belief that it's derived from the word shada, which means breast. And with die, of course, comes to mean the one of the breast. So it's maybe connected to fertility. So the destroyer, nurture. The third choice, it could become the Shaddai comes from the root shadu. Shadu means mountain dweller. So God of the mountain. Oh, this sounds interesting. I could see this one, and maybe later on they'll see this is connected to Mount Sinai, although obviously this is way earlier than Moses, right? But I just want you to get this idea, in mind that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are said to worship El. They don't know the name Yahweh. Okay, Yahweh comes about later. So there you have it. Some people connect to them to demons, and that's true. Absolutely, there's a similar root there as well. Now, the plural form of El, is Eloha, or it could be the feminine, which is Elohim. So anyway, now the word El, by the way, when it says "Thou shalt have no gods before me," it is used to refer to the Jewish God alone. But in Exodus 3:4, Elohim called unto him out of the midst of the bush. So Elohim is used as the name of God, but it's a feminine plural, which I think is interesting. Maybe it was masculine plural earlier, huh? It's a little maybe late language change. And this is another area where scholars fight. But isn't it fun? It's part of the fun, right? Maybe not. So the word El still lingers on. In fact, the word El and Elohim, for example, Elohim is used 2,500 times in the Bible. Yeah, that's true. Sorry, I was reading something. 2,500 times in the Bible. Of course, we get many common names that are connected to the God El, right? So, for example, you got Daniel El, which means God is my judge. You got Samuel El, which means God has heard. You have Ezekiel, which means may God strengthen him. And you have Michael El, which means who is like God. So El is important. How about Israel? Israel, who prevails with God. So the name El is still alive and well and a part of the name of God. So El is an important idea. So according to the Hebrew Bible, the earliest religious rituals associated with El in Genesis often involve either setting up an altar for a sacrifice or a standing stone known as a mezbah, Massebbath, in dedication, a standing stone. We'll talk about the standing stones a little bit. There's a site known as Beth El, which translates Beth, of course, house, Beth, El God, right? The house of God. And according to Genesis, Jacob had a vision of God and followed this experience. He took his stone pillow and set it upright as a stone that was dedicated to his epiphany, further stating, "This stone that I have set up as a pillar, Mazzaboth, shall be God's house." This is Genesis 28:22. One Mazzaboth stood outside of Shechem, which is Nablus today. It's traditionally identified as a stone Joseph erected at the renewal of the covenant. Joshua did in Joshua 24:25. In fact, so far, 142 separate Mezzaboth sites are documented as standing in the southern Negev and eastern Sinai, while the word Mezzaboth and its variants appear 34 times in the Hebrew Bible itself. The earliest archaeological evidence for these are from the 11th to 10th century millennia, and becomes quite common during the 6th through the 3rd millennia BCE. According to the tale of Akhmet, which is inscribed on the 15th century BC cuneiform tablet, Ugarat, Dan El, father of Akhmet, complains to the gods that he, quote, does not have a son to set up a Mazzaboth in the temple in his name. So in this case, it referred to ancestral spirits. The Mazzaboth sites are fascinating. So many of them, but not all of them, connect to El, connect to the sky god. So you're going to have the Canaanites going, you know what, as opposed to making El as a bull in shape, you know, he's from the sky. He's beyond form. These are the Canaanites. So we will just have a representation or reminder of his power as a standing stone. Although we do find evidence that some Canaanites believe that it's in the stone as well, the power of the sky god. But and there's a few examples where they believe Yahweh is connected directly to the stone. We'll talk about this later. Ooh, and I'll give you the sites and the information. So here we have it. Now it's interesting because it's dedicated to El. Wow. So a lot of scholars believe, and it's highly likely, that Jerusalem was a place of a Mezzaboth site, a standing stone. Of course, later on, you do have the rock foundation, which is, of course, very much a standing stone. in the stone, I mean, the mountain itself. But yeah, so, but you have interesting, you have to understand the word El, because the word El means God in Canaanite, becomes, of course, in Hebrew, but El, Elal, Allah, Allah. Many have connected the idea that, hey, another standing stone site dedicated to all high, powerful sky god, right, is a Mecca, the Kaaba stone, is it not? Right? And so you have this early sense of the sky god connected to these Mazzaboth sites in different locations. And there seems to be the beginnings of the idea of, should we make an image of the all high God? Or should we just have it represented as a stone? Does that make sense? So it's all, so you're going, wait a minute, these are ideas that are important to Judaism. Yes, and it's coming from a Canaanite context. You see it starting there. Okay. Well, they also worship Baal. We know this, right? Baal Hadad, which simply means Lord. And he is, of course, master, husband, keeper, right? And he's sometimes shown as a weather god and worshipped by the Semites. We also have another god, goddess, should say, named Asherah. Now, according to the Bible, a wooden pole symbolized a sacred tree representing the goddess Asherah. Now, early on, Canaanite religions venerated trees as goddesses, with female figurines sometimes even having a tree or branches of a tree etched between their navel and their pubic triangle, as you see in the late Bronze Age, oftentimes places like Ugarit and El Baida and El Ajou, right? Outside of biblical texts, her name readily appears in much earlier Akkadian texts as a goddess. And so, based upon iconography, sometimes there's two animals that flank Asherah or a tree, and sometimes there's bundles of grain. Asherah is the wife of El, and which is we find this in Ugarit texts. So God, in a sense, this God of the Canaanites has a wife. According to these sources, Lady Asherah of the sea, or a more fully translated, she who treads on the sea, is connected to this El. It's interesting because she is sometimes described as the creatrix of the gods, or the Elohim, right? And according to 2 Kings 21:7, King Manasseh of Judah placed an Asherah in the temple, and most scholars believe this was the very same Asherah image that King Josiah later moved about 35, 40 years later from here in 2 Kings 23, 6 through 7. So that means that according to the Hebrew Bible, there was an image of this goddess, Asherah, in the temple itself. It's like you can't make this up, right? And so there you have it as a possibility. Okay, all right, so here we go. So moving right along. Pages all mixed up here. That's my 16s and my 17s. There we go. Okay. So going back, let's go back a little ways here. This makes sense. This is the context of this period of time. So we got Abraham. All right, let's talk about Abraham a little bit. We got the Canaanite piece taken care of, right? Feel like you know it, right? So let's talk a little bit more about Abraham. Abraham, accordingly, go actually a little bit further back. The Semites originated from the deserts of Southwest Asia, which is including Arabia and what is now Jordan and Syria. And of course, obviously, Genesis connects to this early story. Accordingly, what happens is that we come across a name that is known as Hebrews. So, but what is this word transliterated into Roman letters EYVER? It could mean maybe the other side of something. The question is, what is it the other side of what? So the Hebrews, the Habiru, are the other side of something. Some people say that they're the other side of the Euphrates River. And so they were from outsiders to the Mesopotamian civilization. Meso meaning middle, Potania meaning rivers, and the rivers being the Tigris and the Euphrates. So the idea is that they're outsiders. They're from the other side of the river, and then they come in, and then they arrive from the area of Arabia. Other people will say, no, the idea of the other side refers to its spiritual beliefs, that they are separate in purity, or they set themselves apart from everybody else. And once again, lots of arguments, but hey, that's the way of the game when it comes to Israel. So there's a joke. Okay, I should tell you this, but okay. So how many opinions do you have when it comes to two Jewish scholars? Of course, 3 opinions. Okay, all right. So there you have it. So now Abraham's father was said to be Terah. He decided to move his family, including his son, from the city of Ur, which is, of course, Mesopotamia, which is in Iraq today, to the city of Haran, and which is the ruins. It's in ruins today. It's in present-day Turkey. And what happens, of course, during this time, was Haran in eastern Anatolia. At this point, Terah dies, and Abram marries his half-sister, Sarah. Yeah, half-sister, you got that right. So Terah was both of their fathers. So, yeah, so Abraham married his half-sister, Sarah. Because Sarah was so beautiful, Abraham twice identified her as his sister whenever they were in the presence of a powerful ruler, for fear that she would be taken away from him. I always think to myself, but she is his sister. I don't. Anyway, moving right along, according to the Hebrew Bible. According to Genesis, all right, God called Abram to faith and obedience to become Abraham after that, right? Telling him to go to the land I will show you and promise to bless him and make him a great nation, even though at this time he is childless. According to Genesis 15:18-21, the land promised to Abraham's descendants was inclusive of all the land from the river or Wadi of Egypt to the Euphrates, which is it's like huge area. And a lot of people to this day, obviously, this will say this is the extent of the domain of what Israel is supposed to be, right? Okay, so this is where they get, if you're wondering. So what happens though is that Abraham, he's Abraham. He arrives in the Oaks of Mamre. I find that fascinating. Yes, I have been to the Oaks of Mamre. This is a site that is like the Elapalooza. It's in the center of El worship. There's Canaanite shrines and altars dedicated to El as early as 2600 BCE. And so I think it's really interesting that of all places, this is where Abraham goes. And you can see the El connection yet again, right? Again, Abraham means father of the multitude. And Sarai is named Sarah. And so, of course, the covenant sign is circumcision. So now we have a problem, and I want to bring this up, and I'm not sure how to bring this up because it is controversial. So I'll just have a drink of water. That's good. Okay, so Sarah, guess what? She's not getting any kind of nation. Nothing's happened. She's kind of old at this point, or older. So, so she gives Abraham Hagar to, quote, be his wife. So Hagar is fully his wife. So Abraham has has two wives, right? Sarah and Hagar. Now Hagar gave birth to the first son, who she named Ishmael. But some stories have 14 years after this, following Sarah repenting for sins. Sarah gave birth to Isaac. Well, now we have a problem. And if you're familiar with lots of traditions here, here you have the second wife bearing the firstborn child, who's a son, and you have the first wife bearing the second-born son. So if you guys know your tradition is, it's the firstborn son that gets everything. Well, that would be Ishmael, right? So, but she, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, which means laughter. Because she didn't believe at first that she could ever give birth. So imagine having a name Laughter. I think that's really cool. I think Isaac is a great name. That's a great name to name a kid. We need more laughter in this world. Anyway, moving right along. So what happens is there's a dispute. The two wives are not getting along. And according to the story, Hagar and Ishmael are sent off into the wilderness. They sometimes translate this as desert, but it's actually just a wilderness. There's water there. Then they do get lost, and then they can't find water. But guess what happens is that they eventually end up around Beersheba. Water does run out at this point. Then eventually Hagar and Ishmael settle around called Desert of Paran. And this was kind of fertile in those days. So, and according to the Hebrew Bible, God loves Ishmael. Yes, God loves Ishmael. God loves Isaac, but he also loves Ishmael. God also promises, according to the Hebrew Bible, that Ishmael will also have a great nation. And Isaac will too. Here's one problem. Paran is located south of the Negev on the way to the Red Sea. I've been there. It's like, oh no, and it's in Israel today. Oh well. But wait a minute. Ishmael will be, of course, according to belief, will be the father of the Arabs. So Isaac, father of the Jews, Ishmael, the father of the Arabs, they are literally brothers, from a Jewish and, well, obviously from Ishmael, from the Jewish perspective, they're brothers. And Ishmael, of course, the line of Ishmael will lead to all the way to Muhammad. This is fascinating. But according to a Muslim belief, Ishmael and Hagar continue further down and end up Mecca. So there's no dispute there. But I think it's interesting that according to the Hebrew Bible, they're in Quran. You want to be quiet about that one. So there you go. So brothers. Okay. So then we get to another curious incident, and that is, you're going, all right, and that is, Abraham, Sarah, now we have Isaac. And accordingly, Genesis 22:1, God tested Abraham, saying to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Of course, Mount Moriah, according to many Jewish scholars, Mount Moriah also happens to be, according to many beliefs, same exact mountain as, well, the Temple Mount. And so the site where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac was the site of the Temple Mount, which of course is Mount Moriah. It is also the famous rock of foundation. It's interesting, right? Well, now it's interesting. You're thinking, wait a minute, and we have realized that not only in the Hebrew Bible, also from the context, human sacrifice was common amongst the Canaanites. And so here again, we're seeing the expectation that Abraham is just going to fulfill the sacrifice of his firstborn son because this was done in the other contexts. Yeah. So this is again the old Canaanite religion. Yes, thank you, David Anderson. Yes, that Canaanite religion spread to the Carthaginians too. Absolutely. So there you have that. All right. Now, but then again, according to Deuteronomy 31, God was against human sacrifice. So what is going on? Is it a contradiction? Is it a test? Well, if you come from a traditional Christian view, is that, he's testing him, but he's meaning actual sacrifice. The Jewish view, I love. The Jewish view is like, well, it's let's talk about it. What? The Jewish view is a little different. First of all, there's a tradition. You'll love this. Of course, it's a test but Isaac was said to be old enough. He's not. I know we picture him to be like a little kid, but he's old enough to walk along Abraham's side. Some say that he was a teenager. There's Talmudic sources that say that Isaac was 37 years old. So as opposed to Isaac going, like, hey, Dad, what are you doing? It's, hey, Dad, what are you doing? 37-year-old guy, Of course, God prevented the sacrifice at the last minute. Angel stopped Abraham. A ram was caught in some bushes. But still, this is another high place, is it not? So sacrifices, as we know, outside the Hebrew Bible and in the Hebrew Bible, high places, the Canaanites would sacrifice on high places, and Mount Moriah, which is the high place in Jerusalem, right? The Temple Mount was such a place. But then again, of course, rabbis will go, yeah, the Genesis Rabbah depicts God as saying, I never considered telling Abraham to slaughter Isaac. The 11th century rabbi Yonah ibn Yonah said that God intended the sacrifice to be symbolic, not literal, but apparently Abraham did not grasp this concept. I love, this is all up for conversation. So we have other ones too. Ibn Caspi declares, how could God command such a revolting thing? So Jewish perspectives not exactly united on this issue, but Christian sources go, yeah, this is what's intended. Okay, so sorry, I'm laughing too hard. I got to stop. Okay, so moving on. Following Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, you have, of course, um, Jacob has many sons. One was called Joseph, and Joseph was, basically Joseph had two wives. He married Leah. There's another story. I don't know. Should I have the Laban story? No, I'm not going to talk about the. Oh, it's so tempting. The Laban story. Basically, Jacob fell in love with Rachel, and then Laban says, "Yeah, well, you can marry her, if you want. You got to work for me for 7 years." And Jacob's all, "I'll do it," and then time comes for the wedding, and he gets really drunk, and they have a bridal initiation within the tent. And so the idea is, Jacob goes in with Rachel, and they do the deed where everybody kind of stands outside the tent. Well, he was so drunk at the time, he woke up with the older daughter of Laban, not Rachel. He's like, "What? What did you do to me?" Oh, this is why you shouldn't drink. so, he's like, "Well, you can if you work 7 more years, then you get Rachel." He's like, "Oh, okay." So he really, really wants Rachel. So he is. So when Rachel has two kids, he is biased towards those two, Benjamin and Joseph, and the others. Yeah, who cares? So you have the 12 tribes, 12 kids, of Jacob, and 12 sons, I should say. And and what makes it worse is that Joseph has kind of an ego. He has this idea of well, first of all, his father gives him this Technicolor dream coat, and then he has these visions, seeing his father as being the sun, mother, moon, and the 11 stars, brothers bowing down to him. I know that goes over pretty well. Or he dreams that his brothers gather bundles of grain when all the grain bundles of his brothers circle now around Joseph's bundle and bow down. He has lots of these visions of things bowing down to him, and the brothers get really tired of him. So what they do is they whisk him off, and they throw him into a pit, and then they take like a bloody, a portion of his garment, and it's all kind of, it's all bloodied, because a wild animal attack, right? And you give it back to Jacob. He's, "Oh no, my son." Meanwhile, the brothers sell him in slavery. And so Joseph is in slavery, and he goes to where? Egypt. Yeah. And he ends up in Potiphar's house, and he's really good at his job, and he's handsome, and Potiphar's wife kind of goes, "Hey, I like you," and then he tries to flee, and she grabs his loincloth, and he runs out naked. Does not look good. She's on the loincloth, and he's naked. And so guess where he goes? Yeah, that's right. Joseph ends up in jail. And he's sitting there with these two prisoners. One is the basically kind of like the butler, and the other is the cook. And Joseph has this gift of knowing the future. So the butler says, "Hey, what's going to happen to me?" And of course, Joseph says, "You're going to be doing okay. Pharaoh's going to forgive you." Cook says, "Yeah, what about me? You're gonna die." So the butler guy, the attendant, remembers that. Well, sort of remembers that, because what happens is he's returned back to Pharaoh, and so while Joseph is moldering in prison, The steward, the butler type, he's back. And Pharaoh has this vision. This is a Hyksos Pharaoh. Egypt is under the Hyksos at this time. And the Hyksos Pharaoh, who's a Semitic Pharaoh, he has his dream. I see, I'm looking and I see, I see, I'm looking here and I see these cows and they're coming out of the river. And I see these fat cows coming out of the river, followed by 7 lean cows who devour the 7 fat cows. What can that possibly mean? And of course, at this time, the steward goes, "Oh, yeah, I know this dude that I'm left moldering in the prison who predicted that I'd be here." Thanks, Pharaoh. That he knows he can interpret this. And so Pharaoh brings them up, and Joseph says, "Hey, it's 7 years of prosperity and 7 years of famine." And Pharaoh somehow says, "Wow, this is great. You're in charge." He gives him his signet ring. He makes him second unto Pharaoh. And Joseph moves all the way up. And he gets an Egyptian wife, too. Egyptian wife and an Egyptian wife. So now, here we go. So, yeah, 7 years of plenty. He's in charge of storing things up under the Hyksos, supposedly, right? And then what happens is during the 7 years of famine is everywhere. And, of course, obviously, the family, the one that, that sold them to slavery, they come on back along with Jacob. they want to have food. Egypt has food, and Joseph supposedly did well. It's a long story. I'm not going to talk about the cup that Benjamin supposedly took and everything else. But eventually, there is a family reunion, and according to the story, they're all brought into Egypt, which not that many of them there. So the theory or the belief or the perspective is that at this point, the Hebrews enter into Egypt. That's the perspective during this time. And at first, it's a good thing. And then, of course, it becomes a bad thing because there rises up a Pharaoh who knows not Joseph. This is Othnos the first. This is the beginning of the new kingdom, the native Egyptian kings. They defeat the Hyksos. And of course, they're destroyed or imprisoned. And along with them were their allies, who are the Hebrews. Does that make sense? In the next 400 years, you have the Egyptian captivity. So that's how they get in there. Is the story of Joseph true? Is it not true? It's not the point. The point is that you still have the story of how these people enter into the Egypt, and then we get kind of get stuck there, right? So do we know if they're there or not? Well, here we go. Now we get it. Now we get to something interesting to me. Let's take a look for the Habiru. All right. So, is there evidence of Hebrews in Egypt? Around 1440 BCE, during the reign of Amenhotep II, Egyptian records mention a group of people known as the Habiru in Egypt. Obviously, the word Habiru, you hear the consonants are Ha, B, Ru. The vowels is the same consonants as in Hebrew. All right. It kind of stands out. Right. Now, who are the Habiru? So we know already there are Habiru now in Egypt. Well, the word Habiru is mentioned quite often in ancient times. It's actually mentioned over 200 times. Yes, within various ancient documents. The name appears, in fact, earlier than those found in Egypt. And you'll find very interesting where these names appear. The first time it appears is in northern Mesopotamia, which states King Urkbatum of the Amorite kingdom of Yankhad named the year here it goes. The year when King Urkbatum made peace with the Sumonim and the Habiru. The date is 1740 BCE. So the first time that the Habiru are mentioned are 1740 BCE in Mesopotamia. Abraham is from Mesopotamia, and he is said to be there between 1800 and 1700 BCE. It's a perfect match. So I don't know. And territorially, it's close to Haran. It is. This is close to Haran, where Abraham later migrated with his father. This is kind of interesting, too. Now, you do have, well, there is another, I should say, there's another one that they say it's from southern Mesopotamia and Habiru as well. I should correct myself. There's one earlier one from 1850 BCE. And this is southern Mesopotamia. So I'm going to correct myself there. There's one earlier one. And I want to bring up this one and some of the other ones from Mesopotamia in general. It looks like, and it does, the Habiru, oh, the various words or associations for the word, it says that they were given special provisions for food or sheep. And the word seems Semitic. It can mean, from the Akkadian verb, migrant or refugee. So it could be a migrant or a refugee. So you get the idea of the Hebrews on the other side of the river. Maybe it's a refugee from the other side. You're going to have Finkelstein and Von de Merup believe the Habiru were a social caste rather than an ethnic group. So you have that. But at the same time, according to the Amarna letters, a Canaanite warlord by the name of Labayu was a Habiru. And he actually ended his status as an Egyptian vassal under the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten between 1353 and 1336. So what I think is interesting, though, is the Habiru are mentioned also around Megiddo, and I keep looking at these sources and I go, wait a second. Here we go. Even though we have the story of the Hebrews, the Habiru in Egypt, we find evidence that they didn't all go to Egypt, but there was still the Habiru in Canaan. What? Yeah, I know we have this idea that, it's like, Jacob and the family, they go with Joseph, and they're all there, and then you have the Egyptian captivity, and they're out of Canaan. The archaeological evidence demonstrates that no, there are Habiru still in Canaan. There is a group of people, right? So just throwing that one in there. See, it's not all perfect, is it? So there you have it. The Habiru also are mentioned. So funny. There's a peace treaty with Egypt between the Hittites and the Egyptians. And there's a reference here in the treaty with Egypt to the Habiru gods along with the name Elohim. What? That the Habiru are connected to worshiping El. So we have this in Egyptian records. I love that. It's like, wait, you gotta, this is not the Hebrew Bible. This is archaeology. Yeah. Take a look at that treaty sometime, the Kadesh Treaty. Is this fascinating? So there is a connection, and we see it. According to Egyptian records, this group known as the Habiru was set to work building cities like Etham and Ramses. This is during Horemheb's reign from 1319 to 1292. It's interesting because Exodus mentions that the Hebrews were working on the very same two cities of Pithom and Ramses. I wonder if the names are related. Hebrew, Habiru. I just thought you might find that interesting. Okay, but then you go, okay, Dr. Rifa, I got all that. Okay, so now what happens? No, okay, so now we have Yahweh. So how are you going to bring up Yahweh? Right now. After I have this wonderful basil seed light cheap juice. Oh, that's really good. Gotta get more of this. Okay. The word Yahweh. Now, Egyptian records during the same period, the records from 1400 BCE, it mentions another group of those living in Canaan. They're known as the Shasu. They live just south of the Dead Sea. They worship a god by the name of Yahweh. This is a big deal. What? 1400 Egyptian records. So, wait, what's going on here? So, beyond El, beliefs that help create Judaism focus on a local Canaanite god known as Yahweh, and mention, of course, worship by the Shasu, according to the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep III. Yep. So Egyptian dates around 1400. If you go with the classic dates, it's 1391 to 1353. But this is a slippery slope. If you're an Egyptologist, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And of course, he would be succeeded by the famous monotheist by the name of Canaanite. Interesting. And so Shasu were Semitic people like the Israelites. They were not Hebrews. They were located in Transjordan. The archaeologists Deaver have determined that Yahweh was worshipped in the land of Edom and was associated with the Edomites. And eventually spread westward from here into the territories where El was the dominant high god. Eventually, as El and Yahweh became understood as one and the same God, then of course Asherah was viewed as the consort of El, and because she was viewed as a consort of Asherah, what will happen is you're gonna actually find evidence where they'll have Yahweh and his wife Asherah. So we do see that even at a Mesoboth site. Is this interesting? So here we go. I'm going to go slowly here. So during this time, you got Habiru in Egypt, supposedly. Well, yes, they are in Egypt. There's their name. Egyptian captivity. They're there for 400 years. And they worship El. They worship El, which they got from the Canaanite worship of El earlier on. Meanwhile, you're going to have in Canaan, you're going to have those who are worshiping El, who are also Habiru. Got it? Meanwhile, there's this other group in Edom, the Edomites, who are worshiping Yahweh. Got it? How do these all come together? Like, peanut butter cup, the peanuts, peanut butter, the chocolate. I mean, how does it all come about? Drum roll, please. It's called the Exodus. Okay, so what happens now is we're heading towards the end of the we're heading towards the end of the late Bronze Age, and everything goes wrong. You don't want to be around during the 1200s into the 1100s BCE. It's not a great time. Things are definitely rough. There is actually a shift in the weather as well, and so you're going to have all these pretty angry and many of them disenfranchised people who worked for the Egyptians and the Hittites in their earlier battles, along with a slew of others from along the coast of Anatolia and some other of the islands around the Aegean. And other groups besides them. They're called the Sea Peoples. They're basically scary pirates that were wearing hats that look much like the kings from Lord of the Rings. It's kind of scary, And anyway, they're on the march. And so what happens is everything's destroyed everywhere. The Hittites, they fall. The Mitanni and other kingdoms in the area of the Levant, they all fall. And the Egyptian, they're so weak. They lost their overseas territories. Remember, I told you the Egyptians had, the Levant. They had much of the Levant. They had the Euphrates, which includes Canaan. Now they lose it all. This would be the perfect time for Moses to leave, right? Yeah, perfect time for Moses to go. Hey, let's go, because they're weak anyway. So Moses. They leave the Exodus, and sometimes they say Ramses the second, 1279 to 1213. But and of course we have as they leave, Um, you're going to have various plagues. This is the origin for the idea of Passover, right? And of course, the Seder meal, which I've enjoyed a few times, quite a few times, are celebrated in memory of this. I think this is so interesting to me. I just can't let this go. So fascinating because this is ancient religion at its best. You're going to have this last plague is that every firstborn child will die, and so the angel of death, it goes off and taking every firstborn child. But those are the Hebrews. They were given a special dispensation. The idea is, well, you take a pure lamb, which will become a Passover lamb, and you take its blood and you put it on the doorpost, the two doorposts and the lintel, and this blood that is pure as a sacrifice will ward away, in a sense, death. And so what happens, the angel of death goes to the doors, and if it happens to have the blood there of the unblemished, perfect lamb, then the angel of death passes it by. Hence, Passover, right? So yeah, this is warding away apotropaic evil. Okay, so what happens now is they leave, and they go off, and you have the Red Sea story, and then they arrive at Mount Sinai. Moses is there, and then of course you have the issuing of the Ten Commandments. I always find the Ten Commandments rather interesting. Of course, the idea is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slavery. So now an agreement is made, a covenant is made, a change is made at the Mount Sinai. And the idea, of course, is that you shall have no other gods before me. And I think this is interesting because it says no other gods. It doesn't deny those gods. And so you have, in a sense, not really monotheism, but henotheism, the idea that our God is above all the others. Later on, it'll be Rashi, it'll be false gods. But at this point, we're not there yet. I think it's interesting. Do not make an image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above. That's interesting. That's kind of exclusive right there. Third, do not swear falsely by the name of the Lord. This has nothing to do with swearing. This has to do with oaths, right? Yeah, so we mistranslate this as do not take the Lord's name in vain. The fourth one is interesting. It says, remember Zakor, or observe Shamor, the Sabbath, and keep it holy. Now, if you remember it, Zakor, it's not as a tough penalty, but if you know the Shamor area, that gets a little bit scary. That means that if you don't, bad things will happen to you. Fifth, honor your father and mother. Six is you shall not murder. It's not you shall not kill. It's you shall not murder. So there you have it. Seventh, you shall not commit adulteries, meaning actual sexual intercourse between a man and a married woman who is not his wife. You didn't hear that one before, huh? Eighth, you shall not steal. Although the Talmud defines this as kidnapping, theft of material property, maybe it didn't matter as much. Ninth, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Fifth, do not covet your neighbor's wife, making it forbidden to actually make plans to take them away. Okay, so there you have, some agreement is made. Also, here we have another dispensation, another big change. God instructs Moses upon Mount Sinai to have the Israelites create a portable tabernacle, literally a residence or dwelling place, as a sacred space intended to hold his divine presence. So now you're moving. Things are changing now. Judaism is changing, right? Now, as opposed to God everywhere, moving in at certain points. Now God can go to a specific place, that being this tent, this tabernacle, and then when you're moving around in the Ark of the Covenant. And the idea is that when you go into the Holy of Holies within this tabernacle, you talk to God and back directly via the Ark of the Covenant. It's kind of like a phone to God, right? And what I think is interesting is the Shekinah. It's just, the Shin, right? The Shekinah of God that that indwells. This is the feminine aspect of it. The Shekinah is feminine, so the spirit, feminine. It's interesting because at this point in Judaism, you're going to have 3 times that there's 3 different words for the Spirit of God in Judaism, and they're all feminine. So this is the remnant of an earlier period of time. And so, for example, you have the Shekinah of God, which is the indwelling, the tabernacling of God going in us, right? Or in a place, the presence of God going into certain uh, um, people or places. You also have Shokmah, right? The wisdom of God, and that is also feminine. And that's explored quite a bit later on in the Hebrew Bible. And of course, finally, you have the Ruach, right? You have the breath of God. All 3 are feminine. So that's fascinating. Well, you can see where we're going here. Now, the celebration. There is a celebration, a dedication to this. And this, of course, is Shabbat, right? Woohoo, right? Also the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of the Harvest. It's also known as the Day of Pentecost, the 50th day. So, of course, in Christianity, the Pentecost is when the Holy Spirit comes down. In Judaism, the Pentecost, this is a Greek word now, is the day when you receive the law. The Jews receive the law. I want to say something to me that is interesting, at least from my perspective, and that is, I just want to tell you this story. Please let me do this. Now, of course, Shabbat is lots of fun, but the idea is that it is a marriage contract between God and the Hebrew people. It's a marriage contract. So what is the marriage contract? The marriage contract itself is the law. It is the Torah. It is. Now, who is getting married? Of course, God is the bridegroom, and Israel is the bride, and Moses is the matchmaker. Does that work? You guys see how that works? Yeah. And this is a bond. This is an important time. According to the Midrash, nature kissed the slopes of Mount Sinai with flowers and lush green vegetation, making a very direct connection between God's arriving power and nature's fertility. Many synagogues decorate the bima with flowers and plants in the design of a traditional Jewish wedding canopy, the kippah, intending to symbolize the marriage between the bride and the groom. Got it? It's interesting. I love talking about this. Well, of course, you got what happens here is, of course, Yom Kippur then comes soon after the Day of Atonement. And, of course, we can talk about what happened there. This of course, relates to the golden calf, all that stuff. They get impatient, and Moses breaks the first set of 10 commandments, and so they have to atone for themselves. This is the holiday where everybody, it's like the Easter of Christianity. Everybody shows up for Yom Kippur. It's like you haven't been there for a while. We haven't seen these guys for a long time. They're back. And then of course, as they go through the wilderness, you have Sukkot, or the feast of booths, which is pretty cool. I like the 4 species and doing the various ritual and so forth in different ways. And that's a whole other hadash, but moving right along, right? Because we had to wrap this up. I hope you guys are enjoying it. We're going through pretty deep stuff. You wanted this talk, right? Okay. So, but I want to make sure we get this peanut butter and chocolate thing together. So what's going to happen is this. Is according to archaeologists now and scholars, what happens is that, was it a mass exodus? Some say it was not a mass exodus. It was a gradual migration. Okay. And they are El worshipers. Some will say that as the El worshipers moved north, they mixed with the group or groups connected to the Edomites who worship Yahweh. You guys got that? And of course, Yahweh is more of this tribal God. So you have El, who is more of this, more of the settled Canaanite, all high god, and now mixes with this warrior tribal god from the area of east of the Dead Sea. Does that make sense? And they mixed, and this is where they mix together. Got it? They mix together, and they become one. And so this is how that happens. You guys got that? Or this is the story, right, of the mixing. Now they enter into, of course, Canaan. We're not going to tell the whole story, although I wish I could. I will go a little bit longer. But what happens is they enter into Canaan, and of course the proclamation is they're supposed to take the whole land, and they take just some of the land. Once again, we have an interesting situation when it comes to archaeology. You take a look, and you do, and there does happen to be areas at this time, going into the 12 and 1100s, where cities are being destroyed. Yeah, there are cities being destroyed, and it seems to be a tribal group that's doing so. You're going, give me the evidence. I'll tell you first, tell Dan. So you'll have a sophisticated kind of city, and then you see it burned. There's a burn level, it's a destructive level. And then what you see after that is these pits that are everywhere dotting the site. What are these pits? Well, what happens is that when migrants during this period of time are traveling along, their homes are tents. And what they will do is they'll dig a pit in their tent to store food and other kinds of things. And we find these pits there. So it's evidence that the previous city got wiped out, and whoever took over it were people who were migrants, who were newcomers. And we know they're newcomers. How do we know that? Because we take a look at the pottery in those pits, the broken pottery. So it's not broken. I got a piece right here, a real piece of that pottery. Anyway, I shouldn't even tell you that. Anyway, so the point of the matter is, yeah, I got the point is, we take a look at the pottery, which I just showed you, and we realize that this pottery is not from there, it's from elsewhere. And pottery, a lot of it in style, comes from not further down the Negev, but even into a group known as the Habiru in Egypt. So we can trace the pottery type all the way there. So yeah, there's evidence. And we see this in other places too. So Tel Dan, it has the evidence of a thin destruction level. It's around 1200 BCE. This is called, if you want the exact name, which I just showed you, I can show it again. There it is. It's called collared rim jars. Okay, and so these have been connected to the Israelites since the 1930s. So there it is. It's kind of cool, huh? Collared rim jars. There we go. Hatzor was also destroyed in 1200 BCE. So we know that. Beth Shen also falls. Wow. So we do have the big cities. They're falling to these invaders. But some will say, here you go, will say, what will happen is the Egyptians have lost, and it's the local population, the Canaanites themselves, who are rising up and overthrowing the previous establishment. That's another theory. So it's, but then in this mess, also it could be those who are from Egypt, who are the Habiru, entering into this gigantic mess. And it is a mess from an archaeological standpoint. Oh, it's like spaghetti, although I like spaghetti. There's a new group that's there that's causing this mess as well, and that's the Philistines. It turns out the Philistines, we know for a fact, DNA, the Philistines are sea people. I know the sea people, they're not very useful. They destroy things, piracy, and a lot of them don't settle down, but the Philistines actually settle down in the Gaza Strip, and they're causing problems for everybody, including the Habiru, or although now we can call them the Israelites because they got Israel now. Okay, so there you have it. Now I guess I'll just kind of wrap things up a little bit, but I want to make sure I want to get to the 5 points of Judaism. So we'll go there in a few seconds. What will happen is that you got this period of time where they don't take all of Israel. They're supposed to take it all. They don't. And they kind of commingle with the Canaanites. So you have an interesting period of time where there's no real such thing as a pure Judaism. You're going to have, it's a mixture. It really is. And the archaeological evidence shows that people are worshiping, they're worshiping El, they're worshiping Yahweh. We find evidence that they're worshiping El and Asherah together, and Yahweh and Asherah together. We're finding evidence that in some cases that there's, they have other places of major worship of those of Israel, Israelite gods. Like, for example, at Arad, we found a Jewish temple in Arad, A-R-A-D. Look it up. Even has a Holy of Holies. Oh, so what's going to happen now is eventually, under David. Oh, I want to mention this real quick. Everybody has a king. They have judges, and the Israelites says, "We want a king. We want a king." So guess what? They got a king, and that's Saul first. And then you have David, and then with David, of course, you have Jerusalem is taken, and of course, finally Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, right? You have a temple up, because David, the Bathsheba kind of thing going on there. Ooh, okay, so what happens is he's allowed to build his temple. City of David's established, but there's no temple. Under his son Solomon, he's allowed to build the temple. And so before this time, the presence of God is in the tabernacle, right? It's in this portable tent thing. But finally, it becomes established. A temple is built during the time of Solomon. Although I would say that Solomon is not exactly the 700 wives, 300 concubines, and they're all worshiping other gods and goddesses, but oh well, whatever. So we know how worship went in the temple now. Now you have this idea of God in a permanent dwelling, that being the temple, and it's the first temple. And so, according to the Mishnah, I'm going to tell you how they do their worship. Accordingly, what happens is every morning, the priests purify themselves and then decide their individual duties by casting lots. Then at the first hour of the morning, the high priest prepares the altar, and the first lamb is brought out and tied to the altar at dawn. Around the third hour of the day, that's around 9 a.m., the temple gates open up. There is a morning benediction, there's a prayer, and the first lamb is sacrificed. Now, the lamb is completely burned on the altar. This is what's called a holocaust. That's where you get the word holocaust. Holocaust, hollow, entire, caustic burn, right? As the drink offering is poured out, the choir Levites sing, and with 2 trumpets sound at intervals, at which point the people gather in the temple fall prostrate. Then the priest then utters the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one," right? And the 10 Commandments. This sacrificial ritual is followed by an incense offering in the holy place. Then at the end of the morning event, 5 priests assemble on the temple steps to pronounce the priestly benediction. On the 6th hour around noontime, which is at the second prayer of the day, gift offerings and sacrifices are made at the temple. Also during the noon hour, the second lamb is brought out and tied to the altar. And during the 9th hour is the third prayer around 3 p.m., which is known as the hour of confession. At this point, the second lamb is sacrificed. And that's exactly what goes on in the temple every day, except for special holidays when it changes up. So if you're wondering, when everybody comes to give their offerings, that's at noon. and eventually it becomes big business where it's like, no, you can't have you can't bring your own dove, can't bring your own sheep in. You got to buy the special temple sheep, which is more expensive. So there's the rackets everywhere. But Anyway, so this temple is built, of course, on the place where it is believed that Abraham, according to tradition, Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac. It was also the location of the worship of the All-High God El. So you can see the connection here. This is Mount Moriah, and this becomes known as the foundation stone. And there's lots of stories about that. The Garden of Eden is under that. And by the way, this idea also goes into Islam. So, it's just fascinating. So this is a very holy site, actual location that's considered holy by God, as opposed to moving around the tabernacle, moving around the Ark of the Covenant. It's in one established place. Okay, well, now what's going to happen is, the kingdom splits. That's right. There's a revolt. Yeah. And so Israel is divided into two. You got the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom, it retains the name Israel. So there you have it. And so the northern kingdom of Israel lasts from 922 to 722 BCE. You have that. It falls, of course, to the Assyrians. And then, of course, you have the southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom is known as Judah, and Jerusalem is its capital. And of course, it in turn falls. It lasts from 922 to 587. At which point, the Neo-Babylonians arrive and destroy it. Now, this is where I wanted to end up today. This is where I'm going to be concluding, because I can't go on forever. Well, I probably could. I could actually tell you the whole story all the way down, but we won't do that. Here, I just flashed on my glasses. Now I won't. It's raining. So, here we go. Where I want to get. So, what happens now is that, well, the northern kingdom is gone, destroyed by the Assyrians. Now the southern kingdom is gone. It's destroyed by the Neo-Babylonians. Jerusalem is destroyed. The first temple is destroyed. Now you've lost the place where God, Yahweh, is worshipped. So where do you worship God? The idea starts to come about that God doesn't go to a place. He is over the people. He follows the people wherever they go. Is that good? Follows the people wherever they shall go. His presence, Canaan, his presence will be amongst them, and he'll give them his wisdom, right? As he gave him the breath of life, right? This is good, right? So they're in Babylon, according theoretically. They're in Babylon, let's just say they are, a lot of them. And what happens is they realize, they go, okay, well, how things were before, you basically had Judaisms. We got lots of Judaisms. And maybe we need to be more organized about it. I call this the big organizational moment. Because before this time, did you have monotheism? And the answer is, you sort of did. You had monotheism, for example, that was practiced in Jerusalem and amongst the priests and a few people. But a lot of the other people were practicing not henotheism, but even polytheism. We know that for a fact, not only from, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles. We know this as a fact also from archaeology. They just are, just the reality. We find in Jewish sites, we find images of Asherah and Baal and others. So there's no secrets in archaeology. All will be revealed. And they're thinking, maybe we need to work on this monotheism idea. Now, this Shema was already being said, but now it becomes a universal acclamation 3 times a day, declaring, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." And the focus will now be on monotheism. So I always look at the Babylonian captivity as the ultimate penalty box, because, earlier on, there's always this temptation. I got to tell you this, it's kind of like, hey, during the time of the judges, It was almost like, okay, so we believe in God and follow dietary rules, yeah, and circumcision, and then there's always that, hey, you fall in love with a Canaanite lady, and all of a sudden you find yourself no longer worshiping God, you're worshiping the Canaanite god or goddess, and you find yourself not not circumcising your kids, and you find yourself having pork chops, so it's back and forth. So what's going to happen is Judaism becomes better organized in the sense of monotheism. Also, the idea number two is chosen people. They see themselves as a chosen people, as selected. They're a specific people, there's a certain identity that becomes deeply forged. Right. Third, they do recognize the Torah. You have bits and pieces of the Torah coming about, but a lot of that was oral tradition. A lot of it, in fact, you still find within the Torah today, you still find the oral tradition repetitions that are there. They're still there, first, especially the Pentateuch, the first 5 books attributed to Moses. You'll see that. You see it there. So the oral tradition is there. Yes, the later parts of the Hebrew Bible are written down, but the early parts, oral tradition, these will finally get written down to join the other ones that are written down. Okay, so you have, in a sense, Torah, you got scripture. But you know what? Not everything's included in the writing, so then you're going to have tradition that will be added on to that, right? And then, of course, the idea is dietary rules. They go, you know what? I think we're all going to follow these dietary rules. We know that earlier on in the archaeological context, they were not all fine following the dietary rules. They are having pork. They are having shellfish. Now we see more often after this point, more of a strict diet of, we avoided some pork, separating milk and meat. Does that make sense? Things are changing drastically at this point. And of course, obviously, circumcision. Now everybody's being circumcised. So you're going to have this ideal, these 5 points, and that, hey, God can go with us, travel wherever we go, with the people. Not in the earlier days where God just kind of shows up at different points, right? Not in the context where, now he is in a specific, he's in the Ark of the Covenant, or he's moving around with the Tabernacle, and not in a one temple building. Now he is amongst the people who accept him. Now, of course, they do get back because the Persians beat up the Neo-Babylonians. Let's do a wrap up. They do beat them up, and they end up back to Israel. And guess what? The Persians are nice. Cyrus and everybody else, they weren't nice at first, but they became nice. And so what Cyrus is actually called a Messiah. And so what's going to happen is now all of a sudden, you got Jerusalem restored, the walls restored, and there's a second temple that is established. But Judaism gets something new. During the time of the exile, and then during the time of the Persians, there's another belief known as Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a very dualistic belief system. It really is. And they have this idea of the end of the world. Early Judaism doesn't talk about the end of the world. It just really doesn't. Zoroastrianism, this Persian belief system, does. And so the Zoroastrian belief perspective is that there is, in the end, a great throne judgment. In fact, what happens is that when you die, you walk across this bridge, right? And if you've been good, this bridge takes you right to the house of song, which is the temporary paradise. If you've been bad, this bridge will twist and turn, and you'll fall into this house of pain and madness. It's like hell. And then what happens is that there will arise one who is connected to Zoroaster, and he will rise, and he will be a special chosen one. And during this period of time, there'll be a resurrection, and those from the house of pain, those from the house of song will come up, and there'll be this great gigantic battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, where the Zoroastrian angel-like beings will fight against the demons, along with the bad humans with the demons and the good humans with the angelic beings, and there'll be this great battle, and then in the end, what will happen is you'll have the good guys win, and there's a great throne judgment, and at which point everybody is thrown into the lake of fire. And if you've been good, you're not going to burn, and you will continue on. And if you've been bad, you'll be burned in this lake of fire. You see what's going on with this one? So this idea now, Zoroastrianism, this idea globs on, and we find this in the book of Daniel, and globs on, and now has added to it. And so now you got apocalyptic Judaism. And this apocalyptic Judaism will form and become very popular. And it does appear in what's called the Dead Sea Scrolls, sometimes associated with the Essenes. Is this good, right? So you see how things work? Whew, almost done. Then after that, they've come back. And then, of course, Alexander the Great arrives and then beats the Persians. And then the realm of Israel, will be under the Greeks. At first, it's under the Ptolemies, and the Ptolemies are nice. And because of that, you have the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, translated into Greek, known as the Septuagint, because everyone's starting to learn Greek over Aramaic, which is the established language of the Persians. But then the other Greek kingdom, which is centered in Antioch, the Seleucids, they come down and they take over this area. And what happens is that they try to convert them over to the Greek religion. And Antiochus IV, one of these Greek kings from Antioch, is a Seleucid. What he does is he sacrifices a pig on the altar, and this causes a revolt. And so this revolt, and of course they reestablish the temple. They beat the Greeks, and they establish a new state. And so they're independent. Again, this is the time of the Maccabees. And of course, there's this oil that is, all I have to do is do this for this. There. That's right. Hanukkah story, right? The oil. This was 1 day's worth, the last 8 days, and have to resanctify the new oil. Okay, anyway. So then, of course, we move along, and the Greeks, the state of Israel, and then, of course, the Romans come along, and Herod's not too great. And then the Romans destroy Jerusalem in 70 CE, and that ends the Second Temple period. Already Judaism was getting used to the idea of we don't have to have a temple, especially the Pharisees were all for that. And they were supportive of a new system called the synagogue system, which is very much like a church that's spread out throughout the diaspora, throughout where Jews were living. So that was good. But up 70 CE, they're thinking, you know what? We got to reorganize again. And so the Pharisees are this particular group, because there's actually a few sects. There's one called the Pharisees, believe in the resurrection. Very much, they believe that you're supposed to be everybody's teachable. So instruction in the Torah is important. You got the Sadducees, and they're sad, you see, because they're the guys in charge of the temple. But since there's no temple anymore, it's destroyed in 70 CE, who needs them? And then you have the Essenes, who are kind of mystical, and they eventually join Christianity. Many of them, not all of them, but some do. We know that. There's a reference there. I can go into that another talk. But the Pharisees, what happens is that's the origins of a new form of Judaism. It's known as Rabbinic Judaism. And then those reforms go into the 2nd and 3rd centuries. All right, and so forth. And yes, we have modern Judaism is born. I wish I had lived through all that, but hey, at least I took it there, right? So you get the idea. The origin of Judaism. This is obviously the Cliff Notes version, but I hope you enjoyed it. Got lots of details there, and thank you so much for being here, and many blessings to you. I just want to say one more thing. This menorah I just inherited. I was partially raised by a Holocaust survivor. Her name is Corrie ten Boom. She saved around 1,000 Jews. She was thrown in a concentration camp. She worked for the Dutch underground. This is her menorah. So it's supposed to go to me. So I got it. So very important, very precious. So anyway, so anyway, so have a great day. If you have any questions, thank you, David Anderson. Sorry I wasn't able to answer all your questions earlier.
Yeah, there were some questions in the chat.
Yeah, lion. Oh yeah, Jane. Lion prostrate sounds unexpected for practitioners of Judaism. It must have been an early practice that changed over a period of time. Yes, I find that extraordinarily interesting. And but they did do that. They did put themselves fully on the ground in a prostrate manner. In fact, I wish I can find it here. Let's see. So that is. So okay. So we'll see that here. Actually, look at the sources here. Altar down, morning, Holocaust. So that's from the Mishnah, and that's also Tamid 4:1. Yeah, and the also from the Mincha. So hope that helps. I gave you two sources.
Thank you.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
That's very.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. More questions. Okay, so could you please comment on the studies which links Jewish and South Arabian Yemen? Finkelstein. There you go. So that was a good one. Thank you, Yarub. It's a good one. Yeah, he's a good archaeologist too. So thank you. Let's see, from Europe Sign. I think I'm answering. Yeah, okay. Shedem. Okay, we've covered. Okay. You guys happy?
I had a question.
Sure.
So I was surprised that there was some written record of the debate between whether they were going to allow graven images or not of their god. Is there somewhere I could see this point and counterpoint?
Okay, so when it comes to graven images, okay, here's the. Oh, I love this topic. Thank you for asking the question. Okay, so what happens is this: is that the restriction on graven images is restricted to the sky, and so some people go, well, I guess it doesn't means the heavens. But here you have a problem. I guess there's an exception to the rule, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. Because last I checked, the Ark of the Covenant has angels on either side. Last I checked, those are images from the sky. But hey, and then we take a look at the archaeological materials, and we realize that they love animal decorations, and we know for a fact that the Jewish temple had animal iconography. They had ox and lions and rams being represented on the actual building. So you do have images that are there. So am I answering your question at all? I think I'm going there.
Yeah, that's so it so
you got images?
so the debate went on much longer than just the very beginning.
Yeah, it could continue the debate. We see this through the archaeology, that this debate continued all the way through the Iron Age. They can't make up their minds, and they leave images. It's like, well, all right. Then again, we have to be very careful, because here's the problem: is that not everybody's really following Judaism. So they're living in the area. They're not all Jewish, but there's some that are Jewish. And you take a look and you see the special purification implements, and then we take a look and there's like, oh, you're eating pork because you have pig bones. It's like, wow. So not completely pure. If that makes any sense. Again, archaeology, there's no secrets. And so you're going to see that within many contexts that are supposed to be those who are Israelites, we see so many images of gods and goddesses that are worshipped in areas that are supposed to be
Yeah.
Yahweh or El alone. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt very called out. I was having shrimp cocktail during the lecture.
Yeah, yeah. I had a shrimp cocktail.
But
Wait,
but
wait, yeah.
that
What
was
we
very reassuring when you were saying that, not everyone's observant. So
Nope, nobody's observed. And the funny thing is, I've had some students come to me and go, "Oh, where is that found?" Because they don't trust archaeology. So I actually make an assignment to them. I said, okay, what I want you to do, you don't believe me, and you only use the Bible as the context for this. That's okay. That's easy. And I make them read sections of First, Second Samuel, First, Second Kings, and First, Second Chronicles. I always love when they come back and they're all sheepish. They're all, okay, you're right. It's like the Bible itself talks about the problem. That they're not doing it. The Philistines were actually sea people. Yeah, and that's easy to Google and find a context for that. And there's actually studies that you can find as well going into the DNA and evidence. Yeah, great question, Laurel. Yes. Can you say a little bit more about the power of words and also wordplay in Judaism? Oh boy, yeah. Word connects to magic. The thing is that here we go. When we talk about Judaism, the name, the name, the name Yahweh. For example, we don't know exactly how that word actually sounded. So we're kind of in an interesting situation here. But in Judaism, you have each Hebrew letter as also sacred. So even pronouncing the Hebrew letters can be a sacred practice. And then when you, of course, say the name or the names of God, we find ritual texts that use the names of God as power tools, as in fact, Adonai Shabbat. Adonai Shabbat is an example. Did you hear what I just said? Adonai Shabbat. This particular power word becomes so popular that it enters into even Greco-Roman magical practice. And we find this word even within the Nag Hammadi library in Gnostic work mixed in. And a form of Gnosticism that's known as Sethian Gnosticism. Most people don't know this, but an aspect of Gnosticism, it was Jewish Gnosticism was the first form, and it's filled with these magical words that come from popular Judaism being used on an everyday basis. Am I answering your question? I think I am.
Yes, absolutely. I thought it would probably be a very huge topic, but I knew you would have something to say, and your first several words were just very profound. That word connects to magic.
Yes. So it is magic. Yeah. And so what's interesting is if we do a study, we take a look at the Hebrew Bible, and even though we have it translated in English as different kinds of things, in Hebrew, the original meaning of many of these words, there's not a prohibition against magic per se. It's just looked at as it's the idea of using the power of God with permission. Does that make sense? You're using the power of God. It goes against the idea of ventriloquism. One of the sections there, you see this in Deuteronomy. It's like, we're against ventriloquism. It's against using or manipulation. But if you're using the words or the names of God in a context that's considered holy, then it's not magic. It's just a miracle. God's working with you. The hadas. Even oh boy, I love. You can see I love this topic just a little bit. It's just slightly interesting to me, maybe, right? I do want to mention one bit. I gotta go there if I can even find it here. Yeah, here it is. Maybe I don't have it here. Maybe not. Okay. Well, many of these, I'll just say this, many of these magical practices we actually find integrated into Jewish holidays. So you do have magical aspects kind of within some of these holiday contexts, and it's not looked at as magical, but it is. Even the idea of putting vegetation on the bima, right? The idea connects to the concept of fertility. Oh yes, I found it. Oh, here it is. Okay. You have here. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. Sukkot. Now, you may want to look this up. It's not magical, but it is magical. Here it is. And I think this, Jane, this is what you're looking for when it comes to this. According in Sukkot, it's the third Jewish holiday. Starts in the wilderness, right? There is something called the lulav, right? You ever heard of the 4 species? So the 4 species is that you have the lulav, Lulav, which are the fronds from a date palm. You have the hadas, which is the sprigs of myrtle. You have an arava, which are willow branches with leaves on it. And finally, you have the etrog, which is a yellow citron. According to Leviticus, of course, the 4 species are bound together. And what you do, and you can see this being done, what you do, they're carried in processions. And what you do is you wave them ritually in 6 distinct directions: north, south, east, west, above, and below. Now, you can go on YouTube, you can see them doing this. What's interesting is all of these plants I just mentioned need lots of water, lots and lots of water. In fact, the last 3 need so much water. However, this is a wilderness, right? Really dry. So the idea is this is a rain festival, and this is a rain ritual to bring rain. And so it's being attracted by the representation of these particular plants that are thirsty. They need water. And so this is an ancient magical practice that becomes part of Sukkot. Isn't that fun? Anyway, does that help, Jane?
Oh, yes, that is very interesting.
Think about it. When if you, I think many of you have seen this done before. You think, wait, why are they waving? Oh yeah, there's an ancient meaning behind it. So yeah, you're going to see this if you take a look at the Hebrew Bible, and a lot of the rituals and ideas are still in modern day Judaism today has these earlier ancient ideas. Even some of the dietary practices that don't seem to make any sense. We have found, like for example, you don't cook a animal in its own milk. That's forbidden. And we have found through archaeology, we have found that the Canaanites and many other groups, they would ritualistically to the gods would actually make a sacrifice of the animal in its own milk. And so they're reacting to this. Anyway.
That's also an ethical concern. They didn't want the mother of the milk, the milk of the mother to reunite with her own child.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet the Canaanites were doing this. So
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yep. Wow. Yeah, interesting. So it was so it's prevalent in their culture. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Yaru. Oh, or you liked it. Yeah. Some other questions. Yeah, dietary restrictions are so interesting. Like, can I tell you some more on dietary restrictions? I don't know if I can, but piggies. You have ancient Israel, and you have a region. It's called the coastal area, the coastal plain, and you got some hills, and then you have the inland. The inland, if you've been to Israel, is really dry, but across the mountains along the coast, where the King's Highway is, it's very fertile. Lots of rain. And what I love about this is I was there in Israel one time, and you see the clouds. If you're from Israel and you're watching, you know what I'm talking about. You see the clouds, and you're hoping they're going to cross the hills over to your side and rain. But you watch them, and because of the currents, they don't cross over. They just kind of go along the mountains, along the coast, and it rains on the other side. You kind of go, come on, please come on over, please. So that means that the Canaanites, because Israel was theoretically supposed to take all of Israel, but they didn't. The coastal plain, much of it was under the Canaanites. So they were getting tons of water, tons of rain, and it's temperate. And so they had piggies. They ate lots of pigs, and it really didn't affect them because pigs eat too much, way too much. But there's a lot of food to be had on that site. And so that was okay, right? It's not as dry and arid as the other side. But you take those piggies on the other side of the hill, there's not a lot to eat, and pigs are not cost effective. Also, pigs eat everything, and I mean everything. So if things are decaying or rotting, they'll eat it, they'll become sick little piggy, and they'll make you sick by eating it. So there's lots of reasons why naturally people who are in the desert do not eat pigs, because they're not cost effective. They eat everything, including things that deteriorate pretty rapidly, and they have a tendency of getting sick, especially out in their own environment. Hope that makes sense. But so what was right for the coastal plain wasn't right for the interior. Hope that makes sense. You know, reason for pork meats. Did you know the ancient Egyptians also did eat pork? Nope. The Arabs, Jews, many of Mesopotamia, not all, but the Egyptians, no way. Any other questions? Oh, and of course, you know, obviously seafood, those are bottom dwellers. And in ancient times, the rivers were toilets. And so the rivers would flow into the ocean, and all the sewage would go right along the right there in the warm waters, and all the shellfish would eat there, and people would eat the shellfish, and they get sick, and all the bacteria in there. You know, that's why cold water seafood's always better, like Maine or Alaska. Anyway. All right. Well, again, I hope you enjoyed this talk. A lot of information. Thank you so much, Jane, for coming, and Laurel, and Jim, and Yarub, and the Michelles, and Sarah, and Tamara, and of course Michelle, Julianne, and obviously, absolutely, Tammy. Thank you so much for being here. Margie, of course, Terry. So I will be off, and have a great night.